I don't know.
Say it with me. I don't know.
Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 182 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Bob Pondillo and I interview Valerie Torico. Dr. Valerie Tarico is a psychologist and writer with a passion for personal and social evolution. Today we discuss Tarico's book, Trusting Doubt. A former evangelical looks at old beliefs in a new light. This book offers personal insight into how we can apply constructive curiosity to our most closely guarded beliefs. As a social commentator, Tarico tackles issues from religious fundamentalism to gender roles to reproductive rights and technologies. A primary focus is on improving access to top-tier contraceptive technologies. To that end, in 2015, she co-founded Resilient Generation, a family planning advocacy hub based in Seattle, Washington, where she lives. She serves on the board of Advocates for Youth, a D.C.-based nonprofit with wide-ranging programs related to reproductive health and justice, and is a senior writer fellow at Sightline Institute, a think tank focused on sustainable prosperity. Her articles have appeared at sites including the Huffington Post, Jezebel, Salon, AlterNet, and the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. And they're all available at ValerieTarico.com. That's Valerie, ValerieTarico.com. Before we get into our talk with Valerie, which is amazing, Bob and I wish you a wonderful winter solstice, time with friends and family, the giving and receiving of gifts from loved ones, and however else you recognize these year-end holidays. If you're going to be with family with whom there might be religious tension, I encourage you to stick to humanist values when you're with them and be present as a healthy, mature version of yourself. And I'm preaching to myself here. To that end, I will now read excerpts from the Third Humanist Manifesto and David Rico's Declarations of Healthy Adulthood. As humans, you and your family members are an integral part of nature, the result of evolutionary change, an unguided process. Our ethical values are derived from human need and interest as tested by experience. Our fulfillment in life emerges from individual participation in the service of humane ideals. Humans are social by nature and find meaning in relationships, working to benefit society, even if it's a micro-society like your family. Maximizes your own individual happiness and theirs. We humanists have respect for differing views, in open social context, as long as they are humane. And in preparation for potentially incendiary encounters with friends and family, say these excerpts from David Rico's Declarations of Healthy Adulthood to yourself before you engage with them. I accept full responsibility for the shape my life has taken. I need never fear my own truth, thoughts, or sexuality. I let people go, away, or stay, and I'm still okay. I accept that I may never feel I am receiving or have received all the attention I seek. I acknowledge that reality is not obligated to me. It remains unaffected by my wishes or rights. One by one, I drop every expectation of people and things. I reconcile myself to the limits on others giving to me and on my giving to them. Until I see another's behavior with compassion, I have not understood it. I let go of blame, regret, vengeance, and the infantile desire to punish those who hurt me or reject me. I am still safe when I cease following the rules my parents or others set for me. I cherish my own integrity and do not use it as a yardstick for anyone else's behavior. I am free to have and entertain any thought. I do not have the right to do whatever I want. I respect the limits of freedom and still act freely. No one can or needs to bail me out. I'm not entitled to be taken care of by anyone or anything. I give without demanding appreciation, though I may always ask for it. I reject whining and complaining as useless distractions from direct action on or withdrawal from unacceptable situations. I let go of control without losing control. If people knew me as I really am, they would love me for being human like them. I drop poses and let my every word and deed reveal what I am really like. I live by personal standards, and at the same time, in self-forgiveness, I make allowances for my occasional lapses. I grant myself a margin of error in my relationships. I release myself from the pain of having to be right or competent all the time. I accept that it is normal to feel that I do not always measure up. I am ultimately adequate to any challenge that comes to me. My self-acceptance is not complacency, since in itself it represents an enormous change on my part. I'm happy to do what I love and love what is. Wholehearted engagement with my circumstances releases my irrepressible liveliness. I love unconditionally and set sane conditions on my self-giving. So get out there and be yourself. Yourself, quote unquote, and presence are precious. Someday you and all your family members will be dead, never to be experienced again. You and they will not be sitting around the dinner table someday, but this Christmas, you and they will be there, together, in the same room, and that is valuable beyond measure. Bring your body, your mind, and your soul into those rooms. As much as you're able and comfortable, be the miracle that you are with those people, whether they understand that or not. Be gentle with yourself. Don't do anything you don't want to do. Be as honest as you can and look for the magic moments, as brief and rare as they may be. And remember, Bob and I, and the relationships you've made through this podcast, and the larger atheist community, love you and know that you're loved by us just as you are, even if your family is unable to do that. Happy holidays, my agnostic friends. We taped the following conversation with Valerie Tarico on November 19th, 2017.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight. not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast, or leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated.
Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode was created by yours truly. Thanks for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is.
Hey, Valerie, hi, it's Bob and Cass.
Hello, good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. No,
So what city are you in?
Seattle,
Okay.
Oh, very good.
I got family in
And-
Seattle.
and you guys are in,
Murfreesboro, Tennessee, outside of Nashville.
Yeah.
So I think Marlene Wynell is maybe how I heard about you, Valerie. Do you know Marlene?
I do know Marlene. We've kind of even co-authored articles together.
Yeah?
In fact, one of my most trafficked articles is one that we co-authored actually about religious trauma syndrome, kind of trying to articulate some of her thinking to my audience, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she must draw a crowd because one of our most listened to episodes, or actually 2 of them now. We've got 2 episodes with her, and they are always high volume.
Yeah, people love Marlene.
She draws a crowd.
Yeah.
Well, she highly recommended you and your book, and Bob and I skimmed it. Bob went ahead and bought a copy because he loved it so much.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Oh,
Valerie.
thanks. I'm honored.
No, it really is. It's. I think if you're the type of person who is wondering why do people behave this way, where did this come from? It's a little history, and it's like one-stop shopping, and it's written in a wise and gentle way, like you're talking to a friend. And it's like it has the history of what you need to know
About Christianity.
About Christianity, right? So. Yeah, I think it's worth a shot in anybody's library. It's very helpful to me. I thought it was great.
Well, I, again, appreciate your vote of confidence.
Well, you're very welcome. Good job on that.
So the name of the book is Trusting Doubt, A Former Evangelical Looks at Old Beliefs in a New Light. And just in looking at the table of contents, there is no stone left unturned here.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Really thorough. So before we get into the book and maybe some of the details therein, we would like to hear about the context of your childhood's religious upbringing.
I was raised in an evangelical Christian family in Phoenix, Arizona. My parents attended what is now a large megachurch there called Scottsdale Bible. And I, in that context, I accepted Jesus as my Savior when I was a young child. In fact, I said I think I did it more than once because hell was really a terrifying place.
Yeah. Well, and this whole repeated invitation, Jesus into your heart, because I think there's a sense, even as a child, that something is supposed to happen, and you might get goosebumps. I mean, there might be some emotional experience, but we used to have a name for it. Is that, actually, what was the name for it? But, a couple of days later, the buzz is worn off, and and so and then a couple of months go by, and you're feeling like, well, I don't know if anything really ever happened. It's almost like, trying to start the engine, and, it's just, and then you need to jump. So you go and you ask Jesus back into your heart. Again, just keep trying to make sure that, something sticks. I don't know. How did it feel for you to ask Jesus into your heart over and over again?
Well, I don't remember because I have a terrible memory.
Yeah.
But, I think that for other people, that kind of conversion experience high lasts for, sometimes it's very brief, sometimes people don't experience it, sometimes it lasts for a long time. And that's true whether it's Christianity or whether it's, sort of new age countercultural cult or kind of, those sort of classes that people go to for psychological transformation. The mechanisms are the same.
Yeah. Cool.
Wow. Isn't that unusual? I've never thought about it that way, that you would, you get a buzz, you get a feeling, you get something, and then it fades and you have to re-up, you have to try again. And rather than going, well, this is bullshit. There's nothing happening here.
Yeah, but you're too young. And honestly, in my case, in the Oklahoma context, everybody in my family, just everybody you knew was a believer to some degree, and you just wanted what everybody else already had. And there was kind of this peer pressure to say, well, it's working for everybody else.
Yeah, what's up?
What's wrong with me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But but hell was the big thing for you, though, right, Valerie? The fear of hell and dying and going there and what have you.
Interestingly, I don't think that hell was the kind of front and center of my childhood. I did take my faith very seriously, as did my family. Mm-hmm. So we were the kind of family that went to church Sunday morning and Sunday evening and Wednesday. And as I got older, for example, in high school, I was also going to a weekly evening Bible study because I really was very sincerely kind of convinced that if this was true, that I needed to be living it fully and that it needed to be the center of my life. So I was the kind of person who, for example, in my high school biology class, got materials from the, Answers in Genesis kind of folks, or
Ken Ham.
And thought I had totally defeated my psychology or my biology teacher when it came to the question of evolution, that I thought I'd out-argued them. But it was also in high school that I first started having questions about my faith for two reasons, or maybe even before high school. I guess leading into high school, I had a friend, Kay, who was a Mormon, and Kay was such a nicer person than I was. She was just a better person all around, and her family seemed incredibly kind and good and generous. And it was really hard for me to imagine that Kay was going to be burning in hell while I was blissfully indifferent to that. I just couldn't, I knew, first of all, that she was a nice person, but I wasn't that bad that I would be indifferent to my friend being tortured. And so I think that was one of the very first cracks in my evangelical belief system. So hell did play a huge part.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a cognitive dissonance that you just, and that just shows that you have a heart. That shows that you have, it's your own ethics and internal compass that said, hey, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah. So are you suggesting then in the book that people have doubt all the time, but they do not trust that doubt? They don't they try to cover it up. They try to shove it aside. Stuff it. Yes, exactly.
People have varying degrees of doubt. There are some Christians who, from what they say and how they live, seem to have incredibly little. But I think I chose the title Trusting Doubt because it is actually the meme that I want to kind of put forward into the world. Most of us do at times kind of have windows of opportunity in which we are less settled on our belief system and more open to new information. And I think those are really important moments. And, if you look at one difference, for example, between faith-based communities and kind of the scientific community, specifically the community of scientists, that one of the core differences is the attitude towards doubt. So that there are people, in religious communities who treat doubt as a sign of weak faith, as a sign of temptation, literally Satan whispering in your ear, and folks who will straight up say that certitude is a virtue. Mm-hmm. And by contrast, doubt itself is sacred in scientific communities, and it is widely regarded as one of the most precious assets we have in terms of being able to be self-correcting and to move knowledge forward. Right. So it isn't always comfortable, but it's what allows us to do the thing that most we need to do if we're going to learn and grow, which is to ask the questions that could show us wrong.
Right. Correct. Yes, I agree.
Dale McGowan, we had Dale McGowan on the show, and he and Jeff Haley wrote a book together. And we noticed he wrote your foreword for this book. I bring that up because one of the things that Dale is arguing is that all religions, but in this case Christianity, evolve to keep up with the culture, to stay relevant, to be able to continue to keep their pews full because people are leaving and they have to stay relevant. And so some churches are becoming LGBT affirming, just because that's, people are leaving because of that. And I'm just going to address this issue of doubt and certainty that historically, yes, my experience, because I was an evangelical for the first 39 years of my life, and the movement in this adaptation type evolution was starting to kind of borrow back the language of doubt, make it okay to be doubtful. And then, of course, the emerging movement within Christianity, they just all out had almost a doubt fetish. They literally were just like, well, faith is not the absence of doubt. It's, it's within doubt. Like faith is what bridges that gap between doubt and knowledge, or doubt and certainty. And so, yeah, I know historically there is a passage, I was trying to look it up, but I think it was a Pauline passage that basically said that you're supposed to know your salvation. And if you don't know it, then you don't have it.
Yeah, need a little more faith there.
Well, something like that. Or in a more Calvinistic sense, the Holy Spirit or God hasn't saved you yet. You've tried, but you're not chosen. Or something like that. It just gets pretty weird. But anyway, so getting back to your childhood, you have siblings?
I'm the oldest of 6.
All right. And are the rest of them all believers, or where do they stand?
We're 50-50 at this point.
Okay.
So I have 2 sisters and 1 brother who are still believers, and the other 2 brothers are, I think probably both of them would self-describe as agnostic.
Okay. And your parents are still believers, both still alive?
My father died.
Okay.
My mother, interestingly, over the last 15 years or so, really moved away from the fundamentalist evangelical church and kind of community that we were a part of, into a more open, theologically open, inquiring, and socially open church, Plymouth Brethren tradition.
Yeah.
So, where they recognize the validity of gay people, and have, I think, like the first LEED certified church building in the greater Phoenix area or something like that. So very different kind of approach to Christianity.
I guess where I'm going is like, so your mom has kind of opened up, and I don't know, did you ever come out to your dad, or were you still a believer when he was alive?
I remember my father died shortly after I moved to Seattle, and I had finished grad school at that point, was living with my boyfriend, who's my now husband of over 20 years, and he said to me before he died that he really was proud of me, but that he wished I would get right with Christ. Mm-hmm. So obviously he had some sense of me not being a true believer any longer. Mm-hmm. And my mom actually, to her credit, read my book. My evangelical siblings have not done that, but my mom read it. And then, interestingly, the one pushback was that she was uncomfortable with the idea that the kind of Christianity she belonged to had emerged out of Catholicism, that it was essentially, child or grandchild of the Catholic tradition. And she said, no, real Christianity existed alongside Catholicism. And I said, I think you need to ask your pastor about that. And so she did. And her pastor said, no, your daughter's right.
Yeah.
Wow. How about that?
Well, I know, and for a lot of people, they just look at Jesus and Paul and the 12 disciples, and they just think that's the church. And then Catholicism came along,
Yeah, right.
And then so this other stream, but
yeah, it's amazing how people really don't have too much of an interest in history, like where it comes from, or where the thoughts and beliefs and what have you come from. Whatever. They're not too interested in that. Yeah. And yet, all you got to do is, there are books everywhere, and people that are very knowledgeable that could tell you about it, but not interested, maybe because they're afraid. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Why do you think, Valerie?
Well, probably partly because Christianity specifically teaches us to kind of erect boundaries or walls around our questions, that there are some kinds of questions that are okay and some kinds that are not okay. But also when you've got the answer, and the answer is it came from God, then you don't really get inspired to ask other kinds of questions. I mean, that's one of, I think, the biggest badnesses, one of the worst things about Christianity is that it stunts curiosity.
Yeah, it's an arrival of sorts. I mean, I found the answer, and in a way, my search is over.
Yeah. Valerie, you take care of, you talk with and help those who are coming out of Christianity that have sort of, what do they call it, that syndrome, that...
post-traumatic or
yes,
post-religious?
Post-religious stress syndrome or whatever it is.
Religious trauma syndrome is what Marlene Winnell has labeled it.
Excellent. That's good. And we talk to people, too. I mean, we're clearly not, trained in psychology or anything, but we're trained in listening and storytelling, and we enjoy hearing, I don't know if we can say we enjoy it, but we do listen to people who have their stories that are just heartbreaking, so sad and so, I don't know, you just think, why would you want to put yourself through this? And I'm wondering if you have the same, well, clearly you do, but how do you help these people? Where do you begin?
So I need to clarify that unlike Marlene Winnell, I don't have an active psychology practice at this point. So the way that I support people who are in recovery from toxic religious experiences and communities is through my writing. But that said, I think that a lot of what people need coming out is some of the same kinds of things we need broadly as human beings. People need to be listened to and have their experiences validated. They need to learn to trust themselves because they've been taught not to. They've been taught that, lean not unto your own understanding. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They've been taught that people on the outside lack a moral core because morality comes from Christianity, and Christianity is a light on a hill and surrounded by darkness. So this is part of Christianity's immune system, right, is to try to kind of erect all of these barriers to people leaving. I think of Christianity as kind of an evolved, self-replicating entity, if you will, and it has all of these different parts of it that have evolved specifically to make it aversive and traumatic for people to leave. And then there are people for whom the process either of leaving Christianity or some of the teachings within Christianity create for them kind of full-blown psychological symptoms of different kinds, whether that's depression or an anxiety disorder, panic, etc. And those people need, again, to kind of both have the experience of their Christianity, kind of validated, and at the same time, they also need some of the skills and resources, and sometimes even medical assisted treatment that is given to people who develop those kinds of symptoms for other reasons.
Yeah, and we call it herd mentality as a kind of almost as a derogatory term, but that's how they. So you'd be a stray sheep, you'd be a stray lamb. And the shepherd would have to come get you because out there's wolves. And the Bible calls Satan a lion that roams to and forth, seeking whom he may devour. So there's fear, of that. And plus just the comfort. People came to Jesus because, especially if they did it at a cognitive age, if they're just a child and they walked right into it, but they keep it for reasons, and it's comforting. Like when I said that journey's over and they've arrived, that's kind of like, that's a relaxing thing. I can put down my backpack, I can get in my cot, and I can sleep because I now have the answer. Jesus is the answer. He's the one true way, and I've found it. Lucky me. And I get to talk to him. I have full access to him 24/7. He loves me just as I am. He's got a plan for my life. This is a sales pitch that's hard to turn down. Eternal bliss versus eternal torture. Anyway, I hear what Valerie's saying in that there's a lot of tools and mechanisms in place, systemic mechanisms in place to keep you from leaving. And I was just a friend of mine, Dave Warnock. Everybody knows he's been on the show a couple of times, but he's writing a book. He's telling his story. He's going back through these memories and being very specific. And he found some old emails that he'd exchanged with some of his friends where he's unpacking this. And he was saying, "Look, I'm not comfortable being certain about anything, you know." Mm-hmm. And this person wrote back and they said, "Yeah, I hear you, but yeah, there are some things that are absolutes that are 100% that we need to, stick to." And, they would say the inerrancy of Scripture, or at least the virgin birth. These are things that...
Really?
Oh, yeah, foundational. And you lose that, and you lose at least, fundamental evangelicalism.
See, I would say water boils at 212 degrees. That's certain. That's where I'd be. But
yeah. So, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to warm up, get up to this place where I can say slippery slope is one of their favorite words. And so if you begin to say, you know what, I don't think Adam and Eve were real people or whatever, you're going to, for a lot of people, they're going to say, whoa, buddy, that's a dangerous path you're going down, right? And I've got friends that when they saw me going down this path, I used to have breakfast every Friday morning with a group of guys. Yeah. And, we're kind of sharing about our lives, our child rearing problems, our marriage problems. I mean, it's almost just a guy's gossip group. And, so I'm sharing about my deconstruction journey, and it's happening in real time. Week after week, they're seeing me go a little further down the path. And there was one friend in particular who refused to keep coming back to those breakfasts because I think, I can't put words in his mouth, but he was afraid, that the more he hears about my deconversion, the more he's going to have to either, plug his ears. Anyway, I am so sorry to be talking so long. This is an interview with Valerie Tarico, and I want to shut the fuck up and get to this book. So you're not an evangelical, and yet the subtitle of this book is that you're looking at old beliefs in a new light. And so I guess that there's a somewhat of a insinuation that you've maybe even adopted some of those old beliefs and are still applying them to your life, even though you're not, a believer.
Well, the subtitle of Former Evangelical Looks at Old Beliefs in a New Light, I don't mean by that to imply that I kind of have carried forward my evangelical belief system, just kind of morphed it in some way. I think that's how my process of spiritual evolution began. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of work to try to kind of figure out how I could come up with rationalizations, justifications, ways of thinking that would allow me to retain my belief that the Bible was the literally perfect Word of God and that Jesus had died for my sins and all of that. And by the time I graduated from Wheaton College of Billy Graham fame, I had developed what I would describe as a fairly idiosyncratic version of the Christian faith in order to try to kind of fend off the moral and rational contradictions that we're all so familiar with. But to respond perhaps more directly to your question, there are things I carry forward that I think came out of my evangelical years. For example, the belief that life is about something bigger than just my immediate kind of near-term pleasures and myself, right? That I'm a part of something bigger than myself. Mm-hmm. I think another meta message that I carried out of evangelical Christianity is that if you believe something, you should do something about it. And I, even to this day, describe myself as a spiritual non-theist. The non-theist part means that I lack any kind of humanoid God concept. I think that human beings largely have created gods in the image of man, and that there's an incredible level of hubris that produces something like the Bible. But I also believe that issues of meaning and morality are at the heart of what it means to be human, and that those are questions for all of us that we need to honor and create space for.
We interviewed a woman a few weeks back, and she said something, and honestly, I'm 51 years old, and I had never thought about this, which just shows my privilege. But she was like, she kind of, we have the scriptures, be ye holy just as I am holy, and be imitators of God, and follow Jesus. Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. And so, obviously, one of the central agendas of a day-to-day evangelical Christian is to emulate Jesus. He's your hero. He's your focus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Yeah. And she was like, I'm not so crazy about fixing, using a male person as my role model. Huh. Now, did you ever have any feelings like that, Valerie?
No, I mean, Christianity is profoundly sexist. Mm-hmm. And I've written a lot about that in recent years. In fact, my most recent article about Roy Moore, which was in which I wrote about the fact that Roy Moore's behavior is perfectly biblical, links other articles that point to sexism in the Bible, sexism in the church fathers, sexism in the kind of church that has evolved out of and that treats the Bible like the literally perfect word of God. But I think for me, for some reason, I was more identified with my father than my mother. Mm-hmm. So all of that sexism didn't apply to me. Mm-hmm. I was like somehow in my own mind the exception. And I was shocked after I graduated from college that my mom confessed that my dad hadn't even wanted to send me because, it's a waste of money. Girls just get married and have babies. So I don't feel like I personally have been profoundly affected by that sexism, except to the extent that it structures the culture around us. And I spend my time full-time working on family planning and birth control, trying to kind of ensure that children come into the world loved and wanted, and that people are able to form the families of their choosing. And needless to say, the sexism embedded in Christianity, the idea that women are literally chattel and that they are made for childbearing. The book of 1 Timothy literally says women will be saved by childbearing. Mm-hmm. And so that, of course, is the hugest barrier that exists to the work that I'm trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. So we've had a couple of people on the show who identified as pro-life, and I kind of struggle with this because obviously I'm pro-choice, but I'm also pro-life, and not as a voting bloc, but as, of course, I'm pro-life. I mean, I would love to see abortions minimized to almost to nothing. I mean, it's not a great thing. However, I never want to take the freedom away for somebody to have it. Do you have any way of articulating those nuances to people that are kind of maybe caught in the throes of that polar conflict?
Yes. So first of all, let me say that again, Christianity is brilliant at co-opting things that belong to all of us. For example, the terms like family values or pro-life, right? And if you look at the history of the Catholic Church and our holidays, the church just moved in and said, oh, there's a holiday here. People all over the world love to celebrate solstice. We're going to claim it and own it and brand it, right? If you look at the traditional rituals that the Catholic Church calls sacraments, birth and death and kind of coming of age, marriage. Again, those are things that are sacred to all of us, and how brilliant that the church kind of said, okay, now we own that. It's now a religious ritual, and then somehow they elbow everyone else out away from these things that are treasures to all of us. So we all treasure life, and that is not at all what this is about. It's about kind of this question of when human life becomes uniquely valuable. And, traditionally that relates to the question of personhood, meaning human life is uniquely valuable because a person is able to think, to feel, to have preferences and intentions, and to kind of love and be loved, to cherish our own existence. And, of course, the ability to feel pleasure and pain is also part of that. So those things exist on a continuum, both in human beings and in other sentient beings around us, other sentient animals. And what the quote, pro-life movement has tried to do is to instead take that, again, something that's sacred to all of us, and then to twist it and to brand it, and in this case, to attach it to just simply the existence of a full contingent of human DNA. Now, what I would say about, kind of the abortion question specifically is that, I have actually called myself pro-abortion, not just pro-choice, but like I'm pro-abortion in the same way that I'm pro-chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. I want everyone who needs chemotherapy to have access to it. And people who have been hit with a surprise pregnancy that stacks the odds against them being able to flourish or their children being able to flourish, whether it's mistimed or unwanted or unhealthy. I really deeply appreciate the fact that we have access to abortion. And in fact, I've written about my abortion because my elder daughter wouldn't exist if I hadn't been able to terminate an unhealthy pregnancy and start afresh. But I think that
well, Miss Tarico, hold on right there, because you just compared a fetus and a human being to a cancerous glob that you want to. You're equating your celebration of chemotherapy with your celebration of abortion. Hell, you shame on you.
Shame on me.
Welcome to the South. Yeah, exactly.
What do you have to say for yourself?
What I have to say for myself is that I think the, quote, pro-life position trivializes what it means to be human, and it trivializes what it means to be a mother. Being a parent being a good parent takes an incredible amount of focus and dedication. It takes an intimate kind of relationship over a lifetime with this little person you are kind of facilitating not only their entry into the world, but their discovery of the world and their discovery of themselves. And to argue that a kind of microscopic blob of cells has the same moral standing as a child, and that we should become parents simply because someone got pregnant either by accident because their contraception failed, or because they were stupid and got drunk, or, we all do things that are not so smart, or whatever it is, or they got assaulted, that so trivializes what it means to be human and what it means to be family that I get angry about it.
I love that position, because they're devaluing life and while claiming to be valuing life.
Exactly.
And I think that when these laws, you see these rooms full of senators and congressmen about to sign something into law that has to do with feminine or female reproductive rights of some sort. There is I was talking a second ago about my own privileged blind spot of being a man. Raising kids, having a child growing inside your body morphing into something that can produce another human being. Like, it's so complex, it's so involved, even the raising of these kids, that dads are, at least in this Western patriarchal culture, dads are less involved. That's a given. That's not a stretch for me to argue that dads have a much less comprehensive understanding of what it takes to raise a kid, let alone bear one in their own body, and yet they're the ones legislating.
And yet this doesn't just affect women, right? The ability to decide when and whether to bring a child into the world, to form families of our choosing. Again, these are some of the most sacred things to all of us, not just to women, not just, but to everyone. And I would argue that those 9 months, yes, pregnancy is a big deal. 700 plus women a year in this country die of pregnancy. Half of those women die from pregnancies that they hadn't even intended or sought. And the church, I hold the church responsible for a lot of that. But the reality is that it's a lifetime, right? Parenthood is a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And once again, this is a place where there's something that is profoundly sacred to all of us, and the church tries to claim it, name it, own it, and control it.
Well, true. That lifelong thing, and we've talked about this before, as far as they claim to be pro-life, but as soon as that baby's born...
so long.
Yeah, and obviously there are wonderful people within Christianity that are adopting, that are fostering, that are taking in, children from all over the world in the United States that are needy. But for the most part, Christianity on the whole, as a demographic, they were the ones, yelling at that bus full of immigrants or, of the kids saying, send them back, So once they're born, they don't seem to care as much. Is that your experience, Valerie?
I mean, look at the evidence around us. Look at what's happening through our political process and kind of how our public services are being decimated. There is this sense of kind of, I think that really the anti-abortion stuff is both about Christianity's pronatalism, right? So if you look back through Christian history, again, I remember I talked about Christianity being a viral self-replicator, and part of its self-replication strategy is go into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. But another part of it through history has been this ensconcing women in the role of breeders and saying that that's what our value is. And then really literally trying to engage in competitive breeding, right? So when you look at the Catholic Church's anti-contraception stance, they've got celibacy for priests because they didn't want to have to pay for the big families of priests on the church's budget, because the church cares very deeply about aggregating assets and protecting those. But then on the other hand, the way that you get a whole bunch of Christian cannon fodder, essentially, is by making breeding a sacred duty and then seeking to outbreed members of other religions and those who have none at all.
Wow. Yeah, and there's not only the Catholics, but the Quiverful movement as well. That's
how Mormons do it too, right?
Yeah.
They're growing more by birthing than they are evangelism.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it's an evolutionary strategy, right? And unfortunately, it has worked for them. Now, I also think that when you start talking about values and what it means to kind of live in our higher selves, or what it means to kind of move into a better future together, that those are kind of particularly pernicious self-replication strategies because of the pressures they have created on our planetary life support system and the threat of collapse that we now all face. So when I think of all the harms that the Catholic Church is doing in the world right now, this one, it's absolute abject resistance to family planning and refusal to acknowledge that it is the kind of thoughtful chosen parenthood that should be the sacred value, rather than encouraging everyone to simply roll the reproductive dice. That this, I think, is the most harmful thing that the church is doing right now.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by something, and I don't even know if I can unpack this and make it make sense. But I'm going to try.
Give it a try.
Give it a try. Principles, ideas, maybe even systemic, structural ideas like capitalism, for example, or like there are structures in place that create such dark evils. Christianity, and yet, in the case of capitalism, if we're talking about Wall Street or just the corruption there within, the corruption within Christianity or Catholicism, they're there. We see the fruit of these things. We see the moral degradation of these systems, and yet, probably in all cases, you're never going to just drill down and find the mastermind. The one guy.
Yeah, like a Mr. Burns in the corner.
Yeah, somebody that's really moving the levers and making all of this happen. No. It's something that the collective shortcomings of almost every human, so like in what, this is why like beliefs, or at least your paradigms or values matter, because there, that there are priests over in Vatican City that have a conscience, and they have looked at this structure and have noticed that it brings out the lower angels of their nature. You have looked at people that work at Wall Street that probably are good guys with wife and kids and want to do the right thing, but they know that in order for me to keep my job, I'm going to have to make some moral sacrifices or compromises. And I don't know. I'm just saying that there are. What can we do? How does it matter that we stick to we become and remain people of integrity, and how just by doing that we may not change the world, but we weren't. There isn't one person making the world bad, so one person is not going to make it good. But there is like this. I just feel this call to like I don't know, remain true to something in hopes that. I mean, maybe it's karma. I mean, what am I saying? Does this anything of this resonate with you, Valerie?
Well, as you were talking, I was struck by the fact that I think there are a surprising number of Christians who would be scratching their heads at the thought that you are using the language of morality to critique Christianity, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about you're talking about integrity. You're talking about
ethics and values and virtues. Yeah,
exactly. And people are taught that those of us who have lost our faith or people who never had it don't have that dimension of what it means to be a human being, right? That we lack a moral core. And so when I say, my fundamental critique of Christianity is a rational critique and a moral critique, right? It's about reality and morality. That in and of itself is a mind warp for some folks.
Yeah. Well, you talk about co-opting. This is the master co-opt of all the things that Christianity ever co-opted. Not just Christmas, not just the words pro-life or whatever.
Yeah.
It's that they are the moral. Their Bible and their institution is the source of morality for society, and without it, what would we do?
Yeah, if you forsake it, suddenly the red lights go green and everybody's running into each other, and it's dogs and cats having sex or whatever.
But yeah.
Right. I mean, the fear that if I leave, I am a bad person, and then the perception on the part of other believers, if this person left, they are a bad person, and now we need to shun them because, be not unequally yoked and with unbelievers and all of that. But what we know from research in psychology and in the other social sciences is that, in fact, humanity does have a shared moral core. It comes out of the biology of what it means to be social animals and our need to be able to live in community with each other, right? That value on reciprocity, on kindness, on truth-telling and truth-seeking. There are a whole bunch of components to it. I actually built a website a few years back called wisdomcommons.org that hosts like about 10,000 now quotes and poems and stories and all kinds of things from various secular and religious wisdom traditions, all aimed at showcasing humanity's shared moral core. But when we look at child development, what we know is that the kind of stages of moral reasoning emerge in children at approximately the same age across different cultures and across different wisdom traditions, whether, again, regardless of which religion it is, regardless of whether they have any religion at all.
Excellent.
Well, and I love these. Sometimes people put little appendices in their books, appendices, yeah. And just this book by our guest, Valerie Tarico, there's an appendix back there. And we talk about this on the show all the time, and I'd never seen this. And so thank you for doing this, Valerie. But we talk about the Golden Rule and how it was how it's found in every religion. And in this appendix, she lists 20 different religions and different ways that it's phrased.
Right.
But and obviously we're talking about Buddhism and Zoroastrianism and stuff that just completely predates Christianity.
Yeah, it's out there. That's for sure.
And even people that were raised secular. We had somebody the other day on, and they said, look, the only thing about, I was raised secular. The only thing, the closest I ever got to Christianity was my mom and dad taught me the Golden Rule. So it's a universal thing that they've co-opted.
Isn't it funny, though, that if you ask most Americans, I bet most people think the Golden Rule comes from Christianity.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure.
Yeah, in fact, Val, I was going to ask you about the way I write too, just the way you organize the book. It's really cool because it starts out with it's kind of like a little history, isn't it? And you start out with the roots of, like, where does this come from? And then you go to the Bible and you talk about the actual contemporary world and then God himself and what have you. So what was your thinking? How did you determine that this is the way we have to move? This is the void that we have to fill, for Christian believers.
The book actually came out of my own set of challenges around continuing my Christian belief. So I basically left Christianity, didn't think about it for about 20 years. Probably, I think in my arrogance, assumed that I outgrew it. Probably most people do. And then it became clear to me at some point that there was a public conversation going on in this country about Christianity, and specifically being driven by the religious right, and that we had George Bush in office at that point. And I thought, wait a minute, if we're going to be having a conversation about Christianity, there are some things that I've thought about quietly, silently for a long time that I want to say. And so I sat down and just kind of started writing out just what were the issues for me that I'd thought about over the years that made my Christian belief system untenable. And that's what then turned into the chapters of Trusting Doubt. So it really is an articulation of my own process of trusting doubt in my own life. And then realizing that at some point we all kind of end up in a space where, God can be defined in such a way that there's no falsification of God. I think we can know very clearly that the Christian deity is impossible, the kind of Orthodox Christian deity is impossible, and that we have very good information about where those ideas came from in pre-Christianity and in pre-Judaism even, and we know what the roots of the kind of Bible are and how it was constructed. Bart Ehrman's books do a wonderful job of kind of laying that out and making it more visible to lay people. Right. But what was I going to say?
Well, what I hear you saying is that there are ways that we can create gods, just craft them so that they're unfalsifiable. So,
right. Where all of us are just making our own best guesses about what's real.
Yeah. Right? So I maybe as an example, as a kid, I'm growing up in Christianity, and there's just kind of this image that God is a man, like literally male. And then you start reading scriptures that talks about how he's a spirit and that he doesn't have flesh, and so he doesn't have a cock. He's not a man. Well, is he a woman? Well, I began to say, well, these are just binary human terms that we're projecting onto God. Even as a Christian, I was saying this. Yeah. And that God is ineffable, unknowable, unfathomable, and I should just get comfortable with not trying to put him in some kind of mold or box that makes him easily accessible by me. Yeah. And so what I was doing, though, is I was morphing, I was changing and adapting a definition of God into another one that was more unfalsifiable. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But Val, I look at it and I go, talking snake? No. Talking donkeys? I don't think so. Rising off the earth and going up into the heavens? Well, not unless you're on a spaceship. Virgin birth? Why doesn't somebody just go, that's all, I'm gone, I'm out, this is great. This is just crazy. Heaven, hell, Satan's, demons? Are you kidding me? I just puzzle over why people behave this way. Is it just fear? Is it hell? Is it death? Is it all those things? What prompts a person to go? I'm sorry. It just blows my mind when I think about it.
It is weird, isn't it? As somebody who's a former evangelical and a psychologist, I still sometimes find it hard to wrap my brain around the fact that things that are so transparently absurd, and things that are so transparently immoral. If you actually read the Bible, that people are somehow able to suspend disbelief, and I just it makes me again think about like how there has been an evolutionary process to kind of hone in and refine a set of beliefs and precepts that slip past our cognitive defenses and that trigger emotions that create a sense of knowledge or certainty in people. But it is kind of humbling as a fellow human being.
Well, we always say on the show here, Valerie, that Bob just doesn't have the believer's gene.
Yeah, something or me. In fact, in the book, Val talks about memetics, memes, and how they are transmitted and stuff. But yeah, for some reason, it didn't stick to me. It didn't, and I grew up Catholic.
Yeah,
and I remember, the unkindness I felt when I grew up. But yeah, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, let's think about this test. You guys have heard of this. I'm sure you could probably even name it, Valerie. But there's these tests that psychologists have done with volunteers. Mm-hmm. They're in a room, another volunteer's in another room, and for some reason, I forget the exact things, but eventually you get this person, a complete stranger of the person in the other room, to electrically shock them.
Right.
And the steps that it takes to get that person to a place where they would otherwise it would never occur to them to electrically shock a stranger for whom they have no malice, and and the steps that it takes to get there. Well, I think about this TV series of Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
So in the movie, you've got at certain points, you've got these barren women, sitting on the bed, the handmaiden laying in between the woman's legs, and then this woman's husband is having sex
with her, right?
And you see something like that, and you ask yourself, well, at what point did this become an okay thing? And then that's what I hear you saying is that. We literally did an interview yesterday, Valerie, with another guest, who at one point said something about how great Passover is as an annual festival and as some kind of memorial of the 10 plagues, I guess, or something. Yeah. And I just wanted to say, Passover is horrifically immoral. I mean, it's the murder, it's the genocide of the firstborn of all these people, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a horrible thing. And yet, how did we get here to the point where it's okay for me to shock somebody I don't know, where it's okay for my wife to, or my husband to fuck another woman right in front of me? And then thirdly, how is Passover ever a celebrated event?
Yes.
So help me out here.
You do have to wonder. I mean, the things that we are able to habituate ourselves to, right?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Yeah, it's weird.
The research that you're referring to is called the Milgram experiment, and it was conducted in the early 1960s. And people were, in fact, being told to kind of punish someone, to shock somebody, and an astounding percent of people complied with the experimenter who was dressed up as an authority figure, with a white lab coat, I believe, and things like that, when they were told to do so in the context of this experiment, giving shock levels that had danger warnings on them. Now, they weren't actually shocking people, but they thought they were. Yeah. Right. And
because an authority said so.
Yeah.
And that's really what this thing is about, right?
It's that experiment is kind of part of, I think, the bedrock of my own psyche, because when I read that as a young adult, I remember thinking, wow, we have no idea what we're capable of under the wrong, those people who went into that experiment would have never thought that they would have done and complied with that, and yet they did. And it's something, when I think about that experiment now, it would never kind of meet ethics review board standards because of concerns about traumatizing the participants. But the fact that experiment happened is, I think, a gift of self-knowledge and humility to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
Well, I mean, we've recently, for years, we just could not understand how the German population let this, let the Holocaust, let the final solution or whatever they call it, happen. Yeah. And yet, we're here we are in our own country, not only celebrating, or at least, in the streets trying to recreate Nazism or whatever. But just, I don't know. I just think when we see the pictures of even like the Little Rock 9 or whatever, for Arkansas integration of schools, and, here's these white June cleavers
yelling, spitting at people,
at young black girls trying to go to school. And we can stand in judgment and we go, I can't, I would never do that. And yet, I got pockets of racism in me. I'm completely misogynist in ways that I still don't fully, that are blind spots.
Yeah.
We all are. Right now the focus is on the racism of white people because white people have been in power a long time, white Europeans in a lot of places. But the reality is that we all have embedded biases and are at risk of tribalism. And in fact, you live in Murfreesboro, I live in Seattle. Sometimes what I see here, paradoxically, is this sort of weird tribalism that creates an inverse pecking order based on traditional, kind of membership in traditionally oppressed tribes, if you will. So kind of a social pecking order where like maybe a black lesbian female would be at the top and a kind of comfortable white male would be at the bottom, and then it just operates like any other pecking order, social pecking order, in terms of whose ideas get listened to, who's allowed to challenge who, the fact that kind of certain unearned characteristics dictate where you fall on that hierarchy, not the merit of your character or your ideas. So we're all vulnerable to that. That's one reason that one of my favorite movies of all time is the movie Crash. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it because it kind of reveals that kind of basic, complicated humanity in all of us.
Yeah. I too. I thought that was an amazing movie, and I've probably 10 years since I've seen it. Maybe, I don't know.
So you just can't say to the man in the white lab coat,
"Fuck you."
No, I'm not going to do that. Are you kidding?
Well, see, this goes back to the gene thing that we always accuse you of not having. Is you also don't have, what we used to call a God-shaped hole, but I think it's an authority-shaped hole.
Oh, fuck them. That's what I say.
Yeah.
See, I don't really. I don't. Give me a reason to respect you. Give me a reason to follow you.
Yeah, you're just way too logical. So.
Okay.
Valerie, have you theorized why evangelicals have so supported Trump? You see, what's the connection there?
Well, there's a lot of reasons I think that evangelicals have supported Trump. I actually did what sounds like a tongue-in-cheek article, but it actually isn't, last year about how Trump and Jehovah have the same personality structure.
I've thought the same thing.
Yes, that's true.
Go ahead,
a war god. Yes,
unpack
indeed.
that.
The narcissism, the kind of infinite demands for loyalty, the sort of posturing and temper, and you name it. It's all there. Very ugly God, very ugly kind of composite, made up person.
Mm-hmm. Well, it goes back to this scientific study with the lab coat. It's that there is something in some people, and it goes back to herd mentality. Tell me what to do. Tell me what to think. We talk about rugged individualism in America, and Christians, by and large, support it. That they cast a lot of shame on welfare leeches and stuff, and they're big bootstrappers and stuff, and yet, ironically and hypocritically, they internally, or at least spiritually, they want somebody to fix this for them. They want somebody to tell them what to do, tell me what to think. And so in a way, that the attraction to Trump and his authoritarianism very much reflects and images of Jehovah and that type of... So their neural pathways are already mapped to accept Trump.
It's a simplifying metric. I mean, the other thing is, if you look at the Bible, it's profoundly tribal. There are God's people and there are godless heathens, right? There are good people and bad. It's about black and white. us and them, black and white thinking. And so I think that also may either attract people who are predisposed to that kind of thinking and likely also reinforces it. I think it's kind of a reciprocal spiral. But if you look at what's going on around us right now with evangelicals, a lot of them are in communities that are genuinely struggling and where they are downwardly mobile, at least kind of across a series of generations, and that there is this incredibly rapid influx of people who are not like them, right? So some of the strongest support for Trump has been in communities that were pretty homogenously white, Protestant, working class communities, and there's been a very rapid influx of people who are people of color, but that's really a proxy for people who are, that's not just a bunch of like kind of say Black Americans moving in. It's a bunch of immigrants moving in, right? Yeah. And so it's people who are culturally different. It's people who look different. They eat different. They talk different. And I think there's a real sense of threat in that. And the fact that people already feel strapped and vulnerable and downwardly mobile means that they just don't have a kind of spirit of generosity and a kind of trust that there's enough to go around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another question I have, do you think that the notion of King David's rule has something to do with, what's going on with Trump? Because King David was I considered a great king, but he also screwed around a lot, and he took a woman and then killed a woman's husband and all those kind of strange things. I'm wondering if they'll say, well, there's leaders that's just like, well, we just support our leaders. I don't know. Yeah,
the Bible creates lots of space for supporting truly ugly behavior in leaders, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, very true.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard sermon after sermon of people's, just talking about how flawed the people in the Bible that God used to do great things, and they're basically saying, so you think that you're flawed, and that makes you disqualified to be used by God. No. Look at this record of flawed people that God used, and so you're a great candidate too. I mean, you know how they spin it that way.
My gosh. Yeah. My gosh.
But it's not fundamentally, I think this movement politically is not about Christianity. I think Christianity is kind of becomes the window dressing. Like if you, and it's not about family values. Like look at the folks who elected a, twice or thrice divorced Hollywood actor over Jimmy Carter, who was, kind of devout to this day, deeply involved in his church in Plains, Georgia, still teaching Sunday school, right? Still kind of the heart and soul of Southern dignity and Christianity, and yet they elected Ronald Reagan. That was the kind of first really powerful emergence of the religious right. And so from the get-go, kind of the prioritizing, the electing of people who are in some ways contemptible, and prioritizing of cultural anxieties and economic anxieties over what are some of the kind of higher shared values of Scripture. That's kind of been the religious right all along.
So I'm really fascinated with this, and this tribalism especially, and how tribalism, I think there's good and bad forms of it. I think we are pack animals. No truth happens in a vacuum. Relationships are crucibles for character building. There are places where being in a tribe is a very positive experience. However, when I see something in my head and then I have to filter it out in my vocabulary, it's probably going to get lost on everybody. But in my head, this is making a lot of sense. And that is, there's this thing that once you get into your tribe and that becomes your value, that's your most precious thing. For example, back on Shanna's episode, I think it was 175 or something, where she said every human needs two things: belonging and authenticity, and oftentimes the social structure makes you choose one or the other. So if you're going to belong to us, you really can't be yourself. So you're going to have to compromise, or at the expense of your authenticity, you can stay in the club. And if that's more important to you, you'll do it. The other way around is, I'm going to be me, and the club's going to kick you out, and you're like, fuck you, I don't need the club. That's you, Bob.
Yes.
So, but I'm just saying, there's this place where the value of being in this tribe is really high, and that's where I'm going to stick. I'm going to stick to that. To the extent, this is what Valerie's saying. To the extent that I'm willing to compromise and maybe even sacrifice other values that I have said before. For example, Trump we're talking about, but there's a guy here in Tennessee named Desjardins, congressman, and we're talking pro-life people, right? This is their number one issue. Abortion's their number one issue. He was a doctor, he had affairs, and he paid for abortions of his mistress's babies of his. And here's the thing: when the left unveils, or even just a journalist, an objective journalist, unearths a story like that, well, we think, oh, this is going to be the end of that campaign. No. And in fact, this is what I want to say. The fact that the news was leaked by the liberal media, right? Yeah. It just makes it, they're going to choose that candidate now just because you, the opposite tribe, opposed him.
That's right. Yeah, it is. I won't be at all surprised if Roy Moore gets elected for that very reason. He's become a martyr for a bunch of diehard fundamentalist evangelicals, but who more than anything are kind of wedded to the idea that they are engaged in spiritual warfare, and that's what's causing their economic problems, basically. Yeah. I mean, it does come back to this fusion of Christianity and economics.
So is it your experience, and I don't know if you've had any in this place, but I think that there's a time and a place where somebody moves so deeply into their tribe, and even in a way like we're saying, that they become judgmental of every other tribe that's not in that, and that there's a season for that. In a person's personal development, and here's the example: a woman who has been patronized her whole life. She's given her life to the service of others, never given a thought to her own needs and wants. Comes into a clearing in her mind. Maybe it's an empty nest, and she says, "Hey, I am here. I have thoughts and feelings. I've never allowed myself to listen to them." And so they adopt a form of feminism that is so staunch that she literally goes through a season where she doesn't trust any man. And there might be a time when her maturation gets to a point where she realizes not all men are out to suppress me, and there may be a few of whom I can trust or whatever. And then she moves back. The elasticity moves. She moves back to the left or the right or wherever she is, further from that pole. I don't know, Valerie, do you see what I'm trying to say as far as there might be a season where somebody's deep and maybe even blind devotion to a certain tribe is a part of the maturation process?
Yes, it can be a part of the maturation process, and it can also be a point at which people become developmentally arrested, right? So, people, sometimes anger is a part of a healing process, but people can get stuck there and then lose their ability to go on. I think part of what we're seeing on the political left right now is this sort of embrace of tribalism in a very vociferous way. People on the left deny that the identity politics stuff is in any way limiting or corrosive, but the fact is that it is. And even if you look at it as a reaction to some pretty outrageous history of oppression, it's still, when bad things happen to people kind of end up in a space where they do feel and think things that are kind of counterproductive. And getting stuck in tribalism can be one of those. I think that a group of people collectively, like, for example, kind of the descendants of slaves, or, for example, the kind of females who have been subject to virtual chattel slavery through much of history, can end up reactive to that in ways that help them get one step further out of it. Anger is an activating emotion, and that's what it evolved to do. But again, getting it's a step on a journey. And if we kind of see it as the destination, then I think we really lose something.
Yeah. Well, anger, enough's enough. That place where, let's say, a woman of chattel treatment just says enough's enough, and it's anger, and it should be. And then that feels powerful. And power's kind of what she's been lacking all these years. And so even though anger or maybe like just, holding it over her oppressors, for the rest of their lives or whatever, it feels powerful, but it's actually just a stage that the real power is to be able to actually go back into these relationships, comfortable in your own skin, not allowing anybody to make you chattel again, and yet, be in community. You mentioned the identity politics and how the left and the right and sometimes our allegiances, like somebody could swing, like we could say about the left, we could swing so far to the left that we want to elect a transgender woman just because she's a transgender woman, right? I mean, we stop looking at credentials because we just want our tribe represented, and that's exactly what we've seen on the right.
Yeah,
and
just the way that the the left is now handling the Al Franken.
I was about to. That's where I was going. Yeah,
yeah. It's interesting because here's what some on the left say: the lion of the Senate, the new speaker, and all that. And now, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
So,
what do you think, Bob?
Yeah. What do I think?
Yeah.
He did a bad thing.
Yeah.
So, and I also know that he was a comedian at the time, and I understand. I work with comedians.
It was 11 years ago. Was he a senator?
No, not yet.
It was pre-senator?
Yeah, it was pre-senator.
Oh gosh.
So you do some crazy ass things when you're working on a USO show and trying to be funny, and it's just offensive.
What do you think, Valerie? We should do with Al?
In our tribalism and our reactivity to each other, we've lost sight that differences in degree are consequential, right? There's a difference between doing that to a 14-year-old and doing, or multiple times, like there are guys who are clearly sort of predatory and exploitative of their power in a serial way, and we exist in a context in which men are socialized to be sexual initiators and sexually aggressive. That's, of course, also part of then what becomes a part of our humor, right?
Yes.
And guys are taught that sexual aggression even is sexy, right? Except when it's not. So, like, if you look at music and media, I remember watching Raiders of the Lost Ark with my daughters when they were in high school, so like whatever decades after it came out, and being like shocked at how sexually aggressive Harrison Ford is in that movie. It had been perfectly comfortable to me the first time I saw it, and was perfectly uncomfortable to me when I saw it, after kind of decades of kind of personal and social evolution. So I think that what's going on here needs to be treated in a broader social context, and that really it's great that people are fed up with men exploiting power to cross sexual boundaries, and that there's increasing absolute intolerance for sexual assault on any level. And at the same time, there's this sort of weird, almost moral frenzy about it that I find and it kind of, and then the mob mentality, like punishing people, guilty until proven innocent. Kind of, there's just a bunch of weird dynamics to this that kind of play out in human societies in all kinds of ways, in other societies on other topic issues, and things that when we see them in other contexts, most of us would feel like, ooh, we need to be cautious here.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Well, I totally agree. I mean, we're not really even afforded the ability to be nuanced about our judgment of Al Franken's offense. On a spectrum or on a continuum.
Especially as a guy, right? Like, you can't say anything as a guy without being perceived as an apologist for rape culture.
Exactly. I'm mansplaining.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hate it, but I'm about to do it. He's about to go on stage with this woman, and they're going to kiss. He says, hey, let's practice the kiss.
Yeah.
Now, here's the thing, and I think what you were saying about movies like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you see this all the time in movies. man and woman.
Yeah.
And maybe they're married to other people. For whatever reason, there's a tension in their relationship, or the fact that they're in this room or whatever. And he kind of maybe moves in for a kiss, or she does, and then they make one kiss, and then he says, I'm sorry I did that. I got to go. And he heads to the door. She walks him to the door. They look at each other again. and
the curtains are flapping in the breeze, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, like they're fighting, they're trying to get away from this, but their love and their animal instinct is just taking over. And the next thing they're going at it. It happens, and then. Yeah. So also, both parties are trying to read the cues of the other. Do I have a chance with this person? I think I just saw her look at me a certain way. I think I just saw him, give some kind of gesture. The joke that we give around this house all the time is that on Dumb and Dumber, what's his name? Jim Carrey. Yeah. He's trying to move on this woman, and she says, there's not a chance, 1 in a million chance. And he goes, so you're telling me there's a chance? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like we men, or even a woman, if she's attracted to a man that's maybe not, it's not reciprocated, we look for fucking clues, or cues that you're telling me there's a chance. So I can see, you've seen this woman, right, that Al Franken kissed?
Yes. And
Drop dead gorgeous.
Very, very pretty lady.
Incredibly gorgeous. She's a model.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe there's a chance. So you're telling me there's a chance. And so he's going to practice this, and he says, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to put my tongue in her mouth. And that was completely presumptuous, but we do it all the time. So I've just completely mansplained this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did.
It's that's okay. You've got the editing knife.
It's my show.
That's right. You decide you don't. But seriously, I also think, again, in this context in which sexual power and initiation is seen as attractive by a lot of women, right? And that you have men who have played that, men who have exploited it, men who have crossed lines in ways that are unacceptable. Like having someone stick their tongue in your mouth when you don't want them to is pretty damn gross.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we also have a context in which a lot of ordinary guys who are trying to kind of figure out the line are going to sometimes get it wrong, right? Like every woman I've ever talked to has had some kind of unwanted sexual
advance.
Sure, of course. And often physical contact. Most women have had some kind of unwanted physical contact, right? And I think that there's a culture shift going on here. I'm really glad there's a culture shift.
Yeah, me too.
I've written about, again, publicly about my own sexual assault experience. I think I'm glad that we are creating a public conversation about it, and about, especially in the context of power inequities, like with the Weinstein thing, where he was playing the fact that he had that, he could exploit his power. And at the same time, as we kind of go through this culture shift, there are going to be people, men and women, who get caught in it because they got it wrong. Like I have a friend my age, mid-50s, we were talking about this, and he said, I've had women actually tell me that asking for explicit consent along the course of kind of a deeper physical engagement was unsexy, right? Like, stop asking. And to my daughter, who's, a generation younger, like, that's just inconceivable to her. Her expectation is that there should be very clear and verbal communication, not just people trying to read nonverbal cues along the way and taking a chance that they've crossed a line. Yeah. So I think we're moving in a good direction. I also think that the kind of self-righteousness that comes out on social media sometimes around individual cases it's quasi-religious.
Do you? It goes back to religion?
It has some of the same dynamic feel to it, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of sitcoms where the wife, for some reason, the writer has cast her as the one with the higher libido. I don't know if it was Archie Bunker or not, but there was there was one where the woman was constantly complaining that her husband was not sexual enough, And I know, that's written by a man.
Probably. Three's Company.
Three's Company.
There was that. That's for sure. And they usually make the father or this is a good thing, by the way, really dumb. In sitcoms, he's the clueless one, and I like that idea because that's kind of the way I feel too. Yeah. But anyway, it does happen. Yeah.
Well, there's this, we've gotten away for a long time with sort of misandry in humor, I would say. Mm-hmm. Like making
what is
fun
misandry?
It's like the opposite of misogyny, where you kind of look down on men.
Okay.
And I think that has been corrective, right? It's been part of an effort to rebalance, and men were largely perceived as so powerful and so vulnerable that you could get away with kind of saying belittling things or knocking them down a notch as a kind of group, and they'd still have plenty of standing left, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I also think part of what we're seeing around us is a generation of young men who've grown up with that, and for whom they don't feel particularly powerful, right? They're kind of coming of age in a context in which they're looking at like not owning a house like the one they grew up in, and like having a hard time finding jobs, and kind of being surrounded by women who are increasingly independent. And, so I think all of a sudden it doesn't feel so funny to them anymore to exist in a context in which it's okay to say mean things about guys. And because they're guys, we trust that they've got enough buffer left that it's not going to hurt them.
Mm-hmm. That's the most profound thing you've said all day. I'm serious. That was so empathic for a woman to have that kind of intuition as to how it feels to be a man in this culture. That was brilliant.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, Valerie. I used to teach college, and there was a time when, I actually asked the question, what does it mean to be a man?
Yeah, we've asked it here on the show.
What in the hell? What is it?
And we've never been able to answer it.
Yeah, I mean, do you don't have to, you go to Kroger, you don't have to hunt anymore, you don't have to, what? Would just be aggressive and be nasty, or have a car that's loud, or, what? Do you have an answer for that? Because I don't. What does it mean to be a man in this culture anymore?
I think that question is it's a question that's in motion, right?
Right, it's in process now, yeah.
There's a movie that I watched with my daughters that, again, I strongly recommend, called The Mask I Wear.
Oh, The Mask I Wear, okay. All right.
And it's about the kind of roles that are sometimes toxic and kind of that we impose on young men that constrain their ability to be who they are. I found it really powerful. I think also in the work that I do on contraception, right, one of the things I actually talk about is that if the ability to decide when and whether to become a parent should be a universal human right, then we are profoundly failing the 50% of the human race that is male, right? And, if you look at the contraceptives that are available for women, the best methods available, like have, the IUD and contraceptive implant, have, you put it in your body, it works for years, you don't have to think about it, right? It has an annual failure rate, an annual pregnancy rate, the best one of 1 in 2,000, literally. And then you can take it out, you can get pregnant immediately. So kind of no long-term kind of consequences. And the methods that are available to guys are either a vasectomy, which is not easily or reliably reversible, or condoms, which are like almost 100-year-old technology. It has, 1 in 15 annual failure rate, I believe. Wow. And you have to roll it on your dick every time you have sex, and it reduces sexual pleasure, right? And then, if you have that pregnancy rate, kind of once a woman does get pregnant, then the decision of whether to carry forward that pregnancy or not really does have to default to the person most affected, the woman. I think a lot of times couples make those decisions together, but in the end, that decision defaults to the woman. And so the guy is like, so vulnerable to having his life thrown off course, to not being able to kind of choose when and whether to become a parent with someone he loves when the time feels right and they have been able to kind of get ready, right? So I think that's a huge gender justice issue, and as much as I loathe a lot of the frank bullshit of the men's rights movement, I do think that there are legitimate things we should be talking about in terms of blind spots in our concept of gender equality and fully empowering all young people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to wrap this up, but those are obviously some complex things. I think that for whatever reason, the gene pool might be one of the reasons, but it's becoming, this whole men are from Mars and women are from Venus is becoming less and less true and relevant. Mm-hmm. That it's like we were talking about Three's Company. I was thinking about going from John Wayne to John Ritter. Yeah, and guess what? We fall on that spectrum somewhere. I do, and you do, and it's what we're, and then even in the racial thing, it's like we're realizing that if we want to stick to tribalism because it works for us, I think it appeals to our lower natures, and I think it appeals to our insecurities, but if we're going to double down on our belonging to this and you're the other, I mean, that's the truth is, I mean, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, if there was a solution to all this conflict, it's just be. You're not a man, you're not a woman. You're not white, you're not black. You're just a human being. Why can't we go there?
Yeah, I would love to see us more centered in our shared humanity.
Yeah.
I mean, our differences are real and consequential, and we need to be able to kind of to see them and acknowledge them while still aspiring to kind of stay centered in our shared humanity. Well,
this is the criticism of like, and the reason that Colbert jokes about it is that I'm colorblind. And guess what? Black people are saying, please don't be colorblind. I have a culture, and it's a culture that I love and I respect, and I think you're disrespecting it by just literally not seeing where we differ. And so there is this, but it's a very fine line between saying, this is where I come from, these are my peeps, this is my heritage, and these are my roots. And all of those things are valuable and are self-identifying and are part of your formation, so celebrate the fuck out of them. But when it comes to an insecurity that it appeals to and that it it enhances, that's where tribalism becomes toxic and becomes war-provoking and violence-provoking.
Yeah.
Okay, so Valerie, tell us a couple of things about yourself that's like lighthearted and fun. What do you do for fun?
What do I do for fun?
A little left turn there.
Well, I got to go to the bathroom, and we're on an hour and 20 minutes of tape here.
Yeah, we should get rolling,
I spend so much time in my head that part of what I do for fun is this like manual labor, literally, digging holes in the garden. But my husband is concerned that I've got stacks of bricks beside the driveway that are just growing and growing because I'm going to turn them into garden paths. And he kind of sees me out there chipping mortar off of old bricks that I've found on Craigslist from people who are taking down their chimneys, and I think he's worried that it may become, some variant of my mother's hoarding disorder.
Okay.
So menial tasks.
Yeah.
Oh, there's some wonderful zen in physical labor.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Put a tourniquet on, as Cass would say.
Yeah, puts a tourniquet on the monkey brain,
Yeah, absolutely. Are you a Netflix kind of person? Do you watch, go to movies or stream, or what's your entertainment vibe?
One of my indulgences is that my husband and daughter and I have different series that we follow together. So Brian and I are watching The Expanse, which is, I love science fiction actually because I think it takes us not just technology-focused sci-fi, but I think that there's a lot of sci-fi that also plays with cultural and social dynamics and allows them to see from the outside. And then, since my elder daughter's now working at Microsoft and in the tech world, one of the things we curl up and watch together is, oh my God, what's it called? The sitcom that's set in, it's called Silicon Valley.
Oh, Silicon Valley, right, on HBO, yes. Yeah. And there's also Black Mirror. Have you watched that? That's the sort of dystopian media, dystopian technical stuff.
can't watch it. It's too dark for me.
Oh, it is.
It
is dark.
I think it's fascinating, but there is so much darkness in the world around us right now with Trump in power that when I'm watching something, I need it to really, really remove me from that.
Yeah. Kind of make you laugh or take you away. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've not seen either one of those.
Expanse, I haven't heard of, but I'll check it out. Is it like a Netflix or something? Or
I think it's Netflix.
all right, we'll check. It's got to be out there somewhere. You're watching.
So how many children do you have? We didn't get to talk about your personal family.
I have 2 daughters, one that just graduated college and one that's still in.
Did you raise them Christian?
No, we raised them without religion, but with a lot of deep conversations about what matters and how to live in the world around us. They're both incredible. Like my daughter, who's now got a job, is incredibly excited that what her employer matches her charitable giving up to kind of several $1,000s, and that this means that she's more powerful, that she can use her money to do even more good in the world. So we've been very immersive of kind of conversations about values and about how we want to kind of affect the world around us.
Well, they're going to hell now, so hope you feel good about that.
Yeah.
They're good people, but good works are filthy rags, Valerie.
I once wrote an article called Why Christian Heaven Would Actually Be Hell. And because it would. I mean, what could be more hellish than some celestial version of North Korea in which you literally spend eternity kind of paying adulation to some being that desperately needs it for some reason, in which nothing ever happens, as the song says, hell is a place where nothing ever happens, and in which, if you read my article, there's very good reason that if you just played out the logic of Christian hell, most of the inhabitants would be fetuses and embryos and children who died before the age of accountability and never actually had any lived experience that they would bring to that existence.
I'm already horrified.
Really?
Well, and all the adults would only be there because they believed in a reward and punishment structure of moralism.
Well, I'll tell you, we're very grateful that you had a time to spend with us, Valerie. Thank you. And the book is terrific. I'm still, I'm not selling. I don't got a piece of this, as they say. I'm not selling this, but
you don't have anything to gain from it.
No, absolutely not. But it's something that I think those who are on this journey of deconversion might want to have in their library. It's well done, well written, and it's gentle, and it's like the conversation we're having now. It's that type of wise kind of feeling you get when you read it. It's called Trusting Doubt.
Yeah.
So
thanks for coming on, Valerie.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
Valerie Tarico, my gosh, what a wise, thoughtful, kind, funny
I was
person.
looking at this table of contents.
Yeah.
You get the roots, you get the Bible,
Yeah.
how the house was built.
I'm always interested in how they organize things like that.
Yeah. And just like when people are saying, "What's the Bible say about this?" You got a whole bunch of stuff about that.
Right.
The world, as Christians, we used to say all truth is God's truth, and so when science would reveal something, we weren't threatened by it.
Oh,
So
okay.
she addresses that line of thinking that when dogma meets science,
Right.
and the nature of the Creator, the problem of pain and human suffering. She addresses that.
Yeah.
I mean, you are talking about somebody that, like she said, when she chips concrete off of bricks, otherwise, when she's not doing something menial, her mind is going.
Yeah, she's a deep thinker, and she's thought about these things, all the things that, people think about as they're moving out of their belief system.
We've talked to a lot of people on the deconversion process. Some of them are just like, oh, well, I literally threw it off like it was a dirty shirt.
Right.
The others, we've heard phrases like, I cut it out of my bones with knives and chisels.
Yeah. Right.
I feel like that with Valerie, she had a lot of questions and she had to get an answer.
She thought her way out.
She thought her way out.
She reasoned her way and thought about it.
And we are the beneficiaries of her work. This is her personal work. Mm-hmm. This is how she came to the conclusion that she did.
It's a great resource.
Yeah.
It really is. Especially if somebody goes, well, what about this? You can go kind of look it up. You can see, well, where did that come from? like you said, the notion of the golden rule.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she'll give you an appendix, an appendix that shows you
20.
Yeah, 20 different religions where it comes from, and most of them predate Christianity.
Christianity.
Yeah, so it's really interesting stuff, and I'm delighted she was on. She has to come back, I think.
I think when I said I thought the most profound thing she said, if you think about it, there were 3 or 4 things where obviously she was railing on misogyny.
Yeah.
The treatment of women as chattel. Big emphasis on reproductive rights. Clearly an advocate and a proponent for women's rights and freedoms. And yet, I found her to be incredibly insightful and empathic towards the male issue.
Yeah.
So this is where when I meet people that are that well-rounded, that evolved, that sensitive, and that attuned to the broader spectrum and the nuances of things, as opposed to just very acute in their relation to the truth, like they only see it through the lens of a certain things. But she really was very versed and diverse in her understanding of complex issues. I don't know.
Yeah, I wish people would do that more. I think we have
It's hard work.
Yeah, it is. We have the capacity to do it, but it does take time, and you have to slow down, and you have to think it through, and all those things. Then you have to go look it up, and but you're a better person for it, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, and which came first? You're a better person for it, or it makes you a better person? It's both and.
Yeah,
because there has to be a level of self-awareness that when you're exploring a certain idea and you actually are just doing a confirmation bias, like you're just reinforcing something, and you don't even know that you're doing that. You're just literally building an argument to support what you already believe, and then when you're confronted with maybe contrary evidence, you might not even see it or recognize it just because of how much you don't want to rock the boat of your own current belief system. And I just think it's somebody who is willing to really do the work and then come out with the verdict personally for herself, and then write the book so others
and
can
write it
come
in
to
such a way, not in an argumentative way at all, but more of a think about this. Here it is.
Yeah.
Take a look. What do you think?
Consider this.
Yeah. So it's very gentle, and it's very wise at the same time. So I'm pleased she was on. Great stuff.
A former evangelical looks at old beliefs in a new light. It's good talk.
Called
Good
Trusting
good
Doubt.
book.
Right. Yeah.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, it was a good show, and we'll probably have to do another one. That's what I'm thinking. What do you think? I'll get my shovel.
I do. I have to.
Okay. We'll see you again, Linkcast. Thanks.
Bye-bye.